Today we're going to examine the curious case of one Ryan Tannehill. No, not that Ryan Tannehill, that one. Let's go. Welcome back. There's a lot that's been said about Ryan Tannehill and the Miami Dolphins lately, especially considering this great run that the Tennessee Titans have gone on as a 6th seed in the playoffs, extending the run of high quarterback rating games that Ryan Tannehill has had. And there's been a lot of discussions about the Miami Dolphins and what went wrong in Miami during Ryan Tannehill's tenure. You've had a lot of former Dolphins come out in support of Ryan Tannehill, and you've had some former Dolphins come out in criticism of the organization, such as Mike Wallace. But what we're going to do is we're going to start to dissect fact from fiction, and we're going to go all the way back to the beginning from when Ryan Tannehill was drafted by the Miami Dolphins back in the 2012 NFL draft. And we're going to look at the support that the Dolphins organization tried to give Ryan Tannehill during his tenure, because I believe that a lot of things have come out in the wash, and it looks like the Dolphins didn't do anything to try to support Ryan Tannehill. And we're going to discover that that's just simply not true. And a lot of the blame of what went wrong is misplaced. Now, this is not a Ryan Tannehill bashing session, because it's quite the contrary. If you're going to draw up an NFL quarterback in a lab, why not Ryan Tannehill? He's 6'4", around 220 pounds, so he's sturdy enough. He's got an arm. He can hit anywhere on the field, and he can scramble. But I don't think that is where the issue lies with Ryan Tannehill. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to look at the NFL's own analysis of Ryan Tannehill coming out of the draft. As a lot of you already know, Ryan Tannehill was a former wide receiver at Texas A&M, and he was a one-year starter, and he had a good, solid senior season. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to go back and look at the description of Ryan Tannehill that was provided by the NFL itself on its website. So I think we're all familiar with what Ryan's strengths are from his size and, running a 4.5 40. But what I wanted to do is I want to highlight what was considered his weaknesses coming out of the draft. And straight from the website, it says, Tannehill is only displayed for 1 year that he has the arm and decision-making at quarterback to start in the NFL. He did a lot to dispel concerns in his senior year, but he will need to continue to develop and likely won't be a starting option as a rookie. So that's the description of a project at quarterback that you feel has NFL starter traits. And I think that is a pretty good analysis of what most of us expected when Ryan Tannehill came out of the draft. Where we are right now with this run he's having with Tennessee is there's a narrative out there that the Miami Dolphins didn't do anything to support Ryan Tannehill. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and dispel that right now, because you have former players coming out, such as Mike Wallace, calling the organization trash, when, of course, there's always blame to go around, but we want to point blame more squarely where it goes. And how much of this actually rests on the shoulder of Ryan Tannehill himself. So there's a narrative out there that the Dolphins did not try to build an offensive line around Ryan Tannehill. And for me, that's a point of contention. So let's look at what the Dolphins actually did around Ryan Tannehill. When you look through Tannehill's time as a starter for the Miami Dolphins, you realize that the Miami Dolphins spent 3 first-round picks, 1 second-round pick, 2 third-round picks, 1 fourth-round pick, and 1 fifth-round pick. And that's all on the offensive line. Now, what we're going to do is we're not going to go through the quality of certain players, but we're going to stick with the notable players that we know are good performers in this league, and several of them went to the Pro Bowl during their tenure. Mike Pouncey, Laramie Tunsil, and Jawan James were all first-round picks. He did not pan out at that time, but Jonathan Martin was a second-round pick. They got Dallas Thomas in the third. They got Jamil Douglas in the fourth and Billy Turner in the fourth. And when you look at where some of these players are now, Billy Turner is the starting right guard for the Green Bay Packers. Jawan James is the starting right tackle for the Denver Broncos. So these are players who left Miami and found success elsewhere, some of them on major free agent contracts. Now, this doesn't include investing $50 million in Brandon Albert, who was also a Pro Bowler during his time in Miami. And that brings us to the next point. He didn't have anybody to throw to. Well, that's also not true. The Miami Dolphins spent $65 million bringing in Mike Wallace. They drafted Devontae Parker, Jarvis Landry, Rashard Matthews, traded for Kenny Stills. They brought in Jordan Cameron, Julius Thomas. So he had pass catching targets, and they did try to surround him with targets. That brings us to the next point. He didn't have any running backs. Well, during his time, they drafted Kenyon Drake, they drafted Jay Ajayi, Lamar Miller, and Damian Williams. Yes, that Damian Williams. So what was the result of all this? With the money and draft picks that the Dolphins invested, and that's not including the $100 million contract that they awarded Ryan Tannehill, what were the results of all that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be fair, and I'm going to completely leave out Ryan Tannehill's rookie season, and I'm going to try to give him my comp. And my comp for him is Kirk Cousins. He's a good quarterback as long as he has a running game. So I went back through his career and I looked at what his results were when Miami actually had decent seasons running the football. And this is what I found. Tying his quarterback rating to rushing performance, we found out in 2013 the Dolphins were 26th in rushing, and Ryan Tannehill had an 81.7 quarterback rating. In 2014, they improved to 12th. Ryan Tannehill had a 92.8 quarterback rating. And then they went on to drop again in 2015 to 23rd, and he fell back to 88.7 quarterback rating. In 2016, which was his last full starting season in Miami, when the Dolphins finished ninth, he had his best quarterback rating of 93.5. He missed the 2017 season with a knee injury, and then he missed 6 games in 2018 with a knee injury. Now, if you go back and you look through his career, to me, he's a similar quarterback to Kirk Cousins. And even statistically, this season, they're pretty close. Now, let's look at what Kirk Cousins has done this season. Kirk Cousins has completed 69% of his passes for 3,600 yards, 26 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions. His quarterback rating was 107.4 this season. How does that compare to Ryan Tannehill? Ryan Tannehill completed 70.3% of his passes for 2,700 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions for a quarterback rating of 117.5. They sound very, very similar, and they're both in run-based offenses. Now, what is the difference between Ryan Tannehill and Kirk Cousins? I'm glad you asked. It's Tennessee's offensive line and Derrick Henry. Now, this is part of the problem with fans, because if building an NFL elite offensive line was that easy, everybody would have one. And through all of the moves that I outlined earlier, it looks like the Dolphins tried to build that offensive line for Ryan Tannehill, and he fell into this situation in Tennessee where their offensive line is actually what everybody believes the Dallas Cowboys offensive line still is. And because of that offensive line, Derrick Henry has come out of nowhere. And you say, well, Derrick Henry was already a good back, but Derrick Henry was so much limited early in his career in Tennessee. His rookie season, he rushed for 490 yards. He followed that up with 744 and finally broke 1,000 yards last season with 1,059 yards. This year, he came out of nowhere with almost 1,600 yards rushing. And if you look at the Tennessee Titans this season, since Ryan Tannehill has started, the games that they lost were either games Derrick Henry was controlled in or he simply did not play. In week 6, when Ryan Tannehill played, Derrick Henry rushed for 15 carries for 28 yards against Denver. They lost. The next loss they took was against Carolina, where he only had 13 carries. Then he played Houston, where they limited him to 4.1 yards per carry, and they lost that game. The next loss they took was New Orleans, and Derrick Henry did not play in that game. So you ask, how did Ryan Tannehill do in those games? Well, against Denver, he had 0 touchdowns and an interception, a 78.1 quarterback rating. Against Carolina, he had a touchdown and 2 interceptions. Against Houston, which was his best game, he actually threw 36 passes and 2 touchdowns, but he also had an interception. Now, New Orleans was by far his best game. He had a 133 quarterback rating, and those are the type of performances that always deceive Dolphins fans into believing that he had turned the corner. And we know what happened in these last 3 games because he went off for 211 yards and won the rushing title against Houston. He followed that up with 182 yards rushing in New England and 195 yards rushing at Baltimore. Now, those 2 playoff games are record performances, and Ryan Tannehill set an infamous record in those same playoff games. Against New England, he only threw for 72 yards and he had a touchdown and an interception with a 61 quarterback rating. Against Baltimore, he only threw 14 passes, but he did not make that critical mistake and throw an interception, which ultimately leads me to this, which is the exact same place I was when Ryan Tannehill played his final season in Miami. And that's, I simply do not know if Ryan Tannehill has turned that corner and become a franchise quarterback. Ryan Tannehill is only 30 years old. So he still has time to become that quarterback, but until he runs into a situation where Derrick Henry is stopped and he puts that team on his back, I can't say that he is or isn't, and he's going to need to do that consistently. But we all know what's going to happen. He's a free agent after this season, and Tennessee's either going to franchise him or they're going to extend him as though they believe that he is the answer. So let's loop back to what happened in Miami, because I believe his last season in Miami was kind of his career in Miami in a nutshell. In the season opener in Adam Gase's last season in Miami, he turned in an abysmal performance against the Cincinnati Bengals. He finished the game with a 57.4 quarterback rating and 2 interceptions, and he got hurt. And that knee injury caused him to miss the next 6 games. He came back with a vengeance in his next 3 games against Indianapolis, Buffalo, and the Patriots. And all those games were well over 100 quarterback rating. But here's the problem. When Miami needed him to lead them into the playoffs against Minnesota, Jacksonville, and Buffalo, he turned in 3 of his worst performances of the season. He had a 59 quarterback rating against Minnesota, an 82 against Jacksonville, and a 43 against Buffalo. And after that, you can see that the writing was kind of on the wall in Miami. Chris Greer was appointed to full control of the team as the general manager, and he brought in his own coach because he did not hire Adam Gase. He inherited Adam Gase. And I can completely understand why Brian Flores would come in and just want to move in a different direction. Tannehill had missed a lot of games over the course of the last 3 years, and it was just time to move on, which cycles us back to the Miami Dolphins. And let's look at what actually went wrong in part 2 of this series, because I believe that you can squarely point the arrow at one particular part where this organization has failed this fan base over the course of the last 10 years. All right? And we'll get into that in part 2 of this series. Stay tuned.
Smarter than me, you ain't smarter than me. Solo nice, bonafide beats, heavy hit spits, wild file style, freak flows fast, close chord dial, make links late at the 8 pass, make more papes, too tired, crash, self-serve.